All right, Lauren, it looks like everybody's here.
Great.
Take it away.
Thank you, Stacy. Thank you for this opportunity. I'm so excited to be able to reach out to folks in Virginia about Unstuck and On Target. And this is actually a spiraling curriculum. I'm going to focus today on the elementary school version, but I'm very excited to have been part of the development and the evaluation of Unstuck and On Target because it's a school-based intervention that's designed to help kids improve their ability to be flexible and on task in the classroom. My name is Lauren Kenworthy. I work at Children's National Medical Center in the district. I get to see a lot of Virginia kids, and I've worked for a long time with several schools kind of closer into the DMV, including Fairfax County and Arlington County. Let's just make sure I can advance my slides here. There we go. So my goal today is to increase your understanding of executive functions and how to enhance them. And I have a plan for doing that, which includes these 4 steps. I want to talk a little bit about what executive functions are. I want to talk about supports that help everyone. And then a few specific components of executive function, like flexibility and how to support those. And then I want to talk about how we, or more directly, you all can teach executive function skills, because executive functions are learned best from the people who are in a child's life every day, teachers and parents, special educators, and those of you that are out there on the front lines. So to start with, what is executive functions? I think a lot of people these days are already familiar. This used to be a slide I had to spend a lot of time on, but what I'm talking about is a brain-based ability, lives in the prefrontal subcortical circuitry of our brains, and it is what helps us regulate our thinking, our behavior, and our feelings. So it's a fundamental regulatory skill, and it's made up of a lot of different components, including things like inhibition. Can I put the brakes on my behavior? Can I be flexible? Can I hold information in mind and plan with it? These are all subcomponents of these big categories of cognitive behavior and emotion regulation. And all of us have experiences where our executive functions come under stress. They are late developing, they're very vulnerable in the brain. And so, many of us have a genetic or environmental factor that may have affected our executive functions, but there's also everyday things like, how did you sleep the night before? Or did you have your coffee this morning? In my case anyway. And have you had enough to eat that day? So most of us have had that experience. I always think about myself in the grocery store on that day when maybe I'm stressed out about a sick family member and I haven't slept well or haven't had my lunch, where we're very much smart enough to grocery shop, but we don't make it through that routine effectively because our executive functions let us down. Maybe we're shopping hungry, and if that's me, I'm in the aisle reaching for those Milano cookies before I've even thought about why it is I've come to the grocery store. That's an inhibition problem. It's going to make me slower to do what I need to do that day. I also could struggle with my working memory and planning. Did I think about what I wanted to cook that week? Did I, before I left home, and look in the cupboard to see what I need? And now, as I'm shopping, am I keeping track of what I'm actually putting in the cart? So full disclosure, maybe this isn't something you've encountered, but I've actually had those moments where it's like, wait a minute, did I pick up the milk yet? Right? So I need to stay focused and hold those things in my working memory. And I can get stuck in the grocery store. I, shop in the DC metro area. We have really high food prices. I get so frustrated when I walk in there and the produce is, not what I expect it to be. I'm planning to make my delicious pear tart. I've checked. I know what I need to buy. The pears are all hard as rock. And until I can switch and say, okay, I'll make apple pie this week, then I'm stuck and I'm slowing myself down. So I just give that really concrete example because it's helpful for us all to get into the heads of the kiddos that we work with and recognize that executive functions are something that we've all encountered challenges with, as well as really appreciating how they help us get through our day. So that's just a teeny bit about what executive functions are. I'm going to check that off our list, and I'm going to move right into what are the supports that help all of us with our executive functioning. And here, I want to start by making what I think is a really fundamental point, and it's that overwhelmed people can't learn. So when I talk about any of these supports or teaching executive functions, and you as a parent or an educator very reasonably say, that's really nice, Lauren, but I am an incredibly busy person. And did you notice, like, we just came through COVID, and all of these families and schools are very stressed right now. We don't have any bandwidth to do an extra thing. I want to remind you that the cost of not supporting and teaching executive functions is overwhelmed people. And overwhelmed people can't learn in the school system. They can't learn very well from their parents, and they have trouble regulating their behavior. And that's what this figure that's drawn from the training I'll talk about a little bit later is meant to express. You've got time here. We're starting here before lunch and moving through a student named Carter's day. And you've got stress level here on the y-axis. So as this curve goes up, we're talking about more stress for Carter. And he shows up at lunch and he's doing pretty well. He's not very stressed, but he struggles with executive functions. And when he's in a noisy room with a lot of social interaction demand and it's somewhat unpredictable, that's hard for him. And without supports, he gets increasingly tense. And then he gets to his teacher after lunch. She doesn't know what's going on in lunch. All she knows is he's staring out the window when he's supposed to be listening, and she corrects him for not being focused, at which point he can get pushed into this overwhelmed, overloaded situation that might be shown by being more anxious. It might be shown by shutting down. It might be shown by becoming more impulsive and melting down. And until we can help him recover, and recovery from overload can take all of us longer than we'd like, he's not ready to learn a lot again. He's not able to problem solve, or listen, or be flexible. And this problem of overwhelm is actually contagious. So whether we're talking here, in this teacher training about his teacher, or in a family context about a parent, the fact is that when kids get overloaded, the adults in their lives also experience increased stress. So it's really costly not to provide those supports. The other thing about providing supports is that we would argue this is a kind of an ethical demand for us too in the 2021 culture and our understanding. We know that our society, our schools, our families are better when all kinds of people are included and valued for what they can share. That strengthens us all, and that can require some supports. We tend to pretty automatically recognize, for instance, that we want a wheelchair ramp into our schools and homes if there's a person trying to access that building who is in a wheelchair. They deserve that access. And the same can be true for executive functions. So when we think about key supports, there's 6 basic ones I'm going to describe, 2 of which I would say are very general and they apply to all of us, every small person, also your spouse or your pet or your colleague. All of us need to have help from each other around not confusing can'ts and won'ts and keeping it positive. And then the others here are a little bit more specific to executive function, and we'll get into them in a minute. In terms of what I mean by not confusing can'ts by with won'ts, is that when you have executive function challenges, when you get stuck, when you have trouble staying focused, you can look like a person who is choosing to have these problems. Partly because they affect you 24/7, unlike a reading disability or a more specific problem that affects a certain set of tasks. These affect everything, whether it's the grocery store or getting out of the house in the morning or being focused in your science class. And so when somebody's doing something all the time, it can be easier to see, to misunderstand that and say, you know, that kiddo is just always opposing what I want to say, always stuck on their own stubborn ideas. They're choosing to be stubborn versus, could it be a can't? Could this be a situation where a child is inflexible and has trouble shifting, right? Likewise, the kid who's sloppy and erratic and won't put their good ideas down on paper, could that be related to their organization or their monitoring problems? So thinking about all of us human beings in terms of behaviors and not assuming that they're choices is a really powerful thing. And I want to be really clear here. This is hard to distinguish, particularly in the small people that we're thinking about today. With children, it's not obvious what a won't is versus what a can't is. And I'm certainly not saying that we all don't have our won'ts. We do. The challenge and the support is to keep an open mind about whether it could be a can't. And we'll come back to this. The other universal effective intervention support that it helps all of us to be better in our lives, and certainly is important for children in school and home environments, is that one of the things we know from psychology better and more, there's more research supporting than anything else, is that we change behavior when we can tell people what they're doing right, much more than when we tell them what they're doing wrong. We talk about a ratio of 4-to-1, 4 praises for every 1 correction or command. This is the hardest advice that we give. And I will say, I, as a neuropsychologist and psychologist, have been guilty for years of telling other parents and teachers that they should do a 4-to-1 praise to correction ratio. When I try to do it with my own children, it's a real challenge. And I think about when my oldest, who's now actually in high school, was growing up and he wanted to learn the violin. And he was a kiddo who didn't have great fine motor skills and didn't have a really good ear. So it was pretty painful. We were doing the Suzuki method. I was supposed to be there with him practicing at each step. I was giving him a lot of corrections and commands because he was doing basically everything wrong, right? And it wasn't very much fun. We were kind of escalating into this, you got to do that, you got to do this. He was escalating into, you don't know, you're not going to tell me how to do this. I'm going to do this on my own kind of thing. Until one Saturday morning when I felt like I had some breathing room. Don't try this when you're stressed. And I said, I am going to really try to practice what I preach. And on one hand, I marked with a pen when I gave a praise, and on the other, a correction. And I needed 4 of these to give 1 of these. Until I did that, I wasn't able to really turn that experience around. And to do that is not as simple as it sounds, because the praise needs to be specific and it needs to be accurate. I couldn't just say to him, oh, you're doing a great job. You're going to be a concert violinist. That's not accurate at that moment. I needed to get in and praise something specific. And, so in the case of the violin, I love the way you're holding your violin the way you're supposed to. Forget what the sound is that's coming out. Here's a good school example or a homework example. I need to make sure that the praise is just clear and clean, not coming along with that correction, right? So thanks for doing that, but, right? And I need to make sure that, again, I'm not speaking beyond the behavior into something much broader than what he's actually doing. So try it out when you've got some extra bandwidth. But again, think about it as working with all of us and helping all of us to be more productive in our lives. So now I've talked a little bit about what executive functions are and a little bit about those supports that I would call universal that we all need to try. And I'm going to move on and talk about some specific components of executive functioning and key supports that help people in these areas: flexibility, organization, planning, and working memory. So we're back to our 3-part definition of what executive functions are, but I'm going to start by focusing in on this flexibility component. And here I want to give you an example from a neurogenetic disorder, autism, that is in some ways a poster child for brain-based problems with flexibility. And I've learned so much from talking to autistic people of all ages. I've studied this for years. There's lots of research evidence I'm happy to share with Stacy later if people want to dive in. But what really hit home to me, what it's like to have a brain-based inflexibility problem, was a young student who said to me, Lauren, Asperger's is like a vice on your brain, you know, those metal vices. And each unexpected event is like another turn on that vice, and it just keeps building until you feel like you're going to explode. Sometimes when you explode, it comes out the wrong way. And this to me is so powerful to help me get into the mind, the experience of a student or a child who has these flexibility problems and is unsupported in their setting around flexibility. Basically, he's telling me it's like medieval torture. He's got this metal vice that's getting tighter and tighter. And that's a really profound, I think, moment for me to kind of pause and recognize this is not trivial. This is going to end badly. This person is going to have trouble learning in school or listening to his parents or making a friend if we don't support this problem. And so the first thing I need to do when I see somebody where I think I'm seeing behaviors that could be related to cognitive inflexibility is try to understand where the can'ts and the won'ts are, right? You know, if the child is having trouble accepting feedback, if they don't transition well, if they have trouble starting something they don't want to do or stopping a meltdown. These are things that might indicate an underlying cognitive cant in terms of their flexibility. These are also behaviors that can be very irritating. I'm sure many of you on the call have had the experience of a child that is compulsively correcting you. You know, I evaluate a lot of kids on the spectrum. So I have people who, you know, I was an English major. I want you to know I've got pretty good grammar, but I'll make an occasional slip and call something, you know, bigger that should be called taller, and they'll let me know about it. That's annoying at first. It's important for me to stop and think there might be this underlying cant that they can't let go of that difference because they have an inflexible brain. So when you see these behaviors, they can be a trigger for you to do a little can't-won't experiment. How do you do that? How do you parse the can'ts from the won'ts? One key way is to provide some supports and see if the problem resolves, right? So if you have an inflexible brain, if you're cognitively inflexible, you're at risk for much more difficulty with violations of expectations. You're a little elementary school kid and you're used to pizza on Fridays, the cafeteria sells out of pizza and you're not happy. You're expressing loudly, we're supposed to be having pizza, what's wrong with you? And somehow it usually ends up being the teacher or the other adult in the room's fault, right? So at that point, we can think, you know, you're talking too loudly, you need to sit down and you need to calm down. We can also think, were there supports that could have been put into place? So in this example, is this a case where we could predict the change a little bit in advance? Give that little guy a heads up that there might not be pizza this day. Give them a reminder when they come into school that we're all looking forward to pizza, but sometimes the cafeteria sells out. Likewise, this child may be just overall supported and much less likely to be overwhelmed if there's some schedules in the classroom, and schools are great for this, right? That kind of lay out the order of the day and maybe the routines. More than anything, the inflexible child really benefits from the flexible adult. I'll give you another example. Another big inflexibility risk. If your brain is set up to be less flexible, you can get overwhelmed by intense feelings. You can have, whoops, I lost a little bit of my text there, sorry. So you can be a person who gets overloaded and then can't calm down and regroup. If you have a child who's melting down or shutting down, in settings, you can think about whether there's something about that setting that you could modify for them. Often it's about giving a child a break or a downtime, getting out of that setting, providing that flexible, safe adult who understands them and help them manage those things. So if you bring in these kinds of supports and a child does better, then you probably had a can't, right? If you bring in these kind of supports and you don't see any change, then you can think, you can consult with a colleague and think about, are there other kinds of things that I could be doing? You can think about yourself And we all have different degrees of flexibility challenges ourselves. And you can recognize that if you're somebody who can get engaged somewhat inflexibly, you're a setup for a power struggle with an inflexible child, where they're going to push your button, you may respond, the child may become more inflexible. And this is a cycle that you're going to want to step out of. And you probably need help. We all do at that moment, from a colleague or, a co-parent or others. But in any case, putting those supports in may give you really important information about what's going on for that child. And the other thing that can be so helpful is to recognize that there are some strengths that come with inflexibility. And one piece of the support process may be providing opportunities for them to work from their position of strength. Provide them as many routines, but also value and praise their persistence and reliability. And recognize that inflexibility might be adaptive in some situations where it's preventing a child from getting overloaded. If the child is saying, I will not eat in the cafeteria, it could be because the cafeteria is really overwhelming him or her, and she's trying to prevent that experience. Or I will not write that essay might be a sign that the child is overloaded by that writing demand and needs some more structure and support to get through it. Let's move on to organization and integration. This is a key skill that we do cognitively, and it's fundamental to enabling us to learn new information and manage complex and increasingly complex information. If you stop for a minute, that's the job of childhood, right? Their job is to learn new information and to, as they progress, to deal with increasingly complex information. Us adults, sometimes we can kind of just skate along on what it is that we learned last week, or in my case, in my job, there's things I do I've been doing for 20 years, right? They're valuable, they're helpful. I learned how to do them, I can keep doing them. For a child, it's not good enough that last week they learned long division. Now they have to apply it to a word problem because you're moving ahead with them, and that's the expectation. And here, I want to give you an example that comes straight from the work that I do as a neuropsychologist and the assessments that I do. And the reason I'm showing you this figure is because one of the key things that we do when we do neuropsychological assessments is we try to understand what's the underlying cognitive process that's ending up producing a result. And in this case, what I'm showing you is a drawing that a little boy who came to me when he was 7 because he was on his teacher's very last nerve because he, quote, would not write. This is the drawing that he made when I showed him a black and white figure that looked really just like this. He made a very good replication of what the figure looked like. And I could stop there. But what I'm interested in is I show this complicated figure. This is what it looks like. I ask him to copy it, and then I watch him copy it. And the different colored pencils here are what help me show you how he copied it, because now I can break down the process. And what's really interesting about this copy is that when I ask him to contend with a lot of new information, and I ask him to do it in a way that he has to integrate visual and motor because he's looking and drawing. He approaches it. His process is completely different than what we would expect. So I think, just want to check one thing here. Yeah, sorry, I left out the model, which is usually how I teach this, but bear with me here because the model, the black and white picture that he's copying, is this base rectangle here, and it has a big X, and it has a big horizontal and diagonal line, and then it has these details he's put in. So far, so good. But the way he did it is very different than the way somebody who doesn't have those organization and integration challenges does it, because he broke it down into so many little parts. So many people will draw the rectangle first. He started over here with this green cross, and then he went down and made this little green box that goes at the bottom of the rectangle, and then this figure. Then he went and drew this little blue triangle here. So this is a very unusual approach. As I say, many people would give me the box, and then they would give me this as one X. He's made this X actually into 6 separate lines, pulling out aspects of the design that most of us don't even see as separate when we look at it as a black and white design. And what he's telling me here is when he has to contend with complicated information, he has a much bigger job than a person who integrates well, because he goes a little piece at a time, and he has to line up all these little pieces to make the whole. And he does a really impressive job, especially since his fine motor control wasn't great. The problem is when I take the figure away and ask him what he remembered of what he just copied, he doesn't have enough information left. And that's because of the way he copied it. If you approach this as a big picture, what are the key big elements? You've got the rectangle, the cross, the diagonals, right? You've got a couple key figures. He's got many, many little pieces that he's got to remember, and they overload his memory, and he gives me very little. And this is a way that I can share with you what it feels like to have a cognitive limitation around how you organize and integrate information, and how easily then you would get overloaded and overwhelmed. And in his case, he had a vocabulary that was in the superior range, but he was overwhelmed when he was asked to integrate that into writing the paragraph, that his teacher wanted him to do. So when you suspect these organization problems, you want to think about whether you're seeing behaviors that look like won'ts that might be can'ts. Being really disorganized as you speak, or very literal in your language. No, you didn't say that. You said, right? Where you seem to be correcting, but also stuck in a detail of what the language means. When you're compulsively asking for structure in a new situation, wait a minute, what's going to happen next? Then what's going to happen? The field trip becomes very stressful, or the family vacation. Where are we going to go? What am I going to be able to eat? You're getting stuck on those details, and you're stuck on inconsistencies of others and needing a lot of structure. Those may be signs that you are a person who has these underlying organization problems. So again, if you suspect that, you have to do this experiment where you provide some supports and see if you can improve the situation for that child. So disorganization risks means that children may struggle to show what they know. It's very frustrating as a school staff member, a teacher, when you have a student who clearly has huge knowledge but doesn't show it in their work. That looks like they're holding something back, or they're lazy or sloppy. And then in that case, you can pause and think, could I make this big picture more explicit? Is there something I can do to really support this child in understanding what I'm looking for in the work? Is that a study guide? Is that, instead of asking an open-ended question, tell me about, is it better if I ask them a multiple choice question or otherwise closed format question where they have options to select from? Can I give them a more detailed writing rubric? How can I increase the structure for them of what I'm expecting, and basically enable them to break it down into smaller chunks so that they can go one step at a time, because that's going to be a strength for them. If you think about the strengths for folks who process details, they're going to be good at following a recipe, a checklist, or a routine, and you may be able to give them that. There may be the 3-step checklist that they need to follow to answer the question, or the routine that you want them to use every time they get a word problem in math. They're also often good at following rules and respecting rules when they understand them. So I want to move right along and talk about working memory and planning. And these are brain-based abilities that enable us to hold information in mind and enable us to have a goal, to have that big picture that we were just talking about, and then be able to identify the steps that we would need to follow it. And I would tell you that there's a huge risk for people who struggle with planning and working memory, which is that they appear to be kids who won't follow directions and who can't work independently. And this is really, again, difficult for teachers and parents alike, right? If you have to stand by that student's desk, right, when the minute you turn away, they get off task, that's a very frustrating experience. And as a parent, you know, if you have a kiddo where you can't send them off to mow the lawn because they will get lost in step one, or they'll up to their room to get something, and you know, half an hour later, you're thinking, wait a minute, where are they and what are they doing? You know, you see these behaviors and you need to think about whether they're indicative of underlying planning and working memory risks. And one of the key things to think about here is, can I give this child hard copy of the steps I want them to follow? And here I would argue whiteboards are truly magic. But if you don't want to use a whiteboard, use a sticky note, right? You can use the Socratic method where you ask the kid, what is the next step? What are you going to do next? Computers can support a child's poor working memory and planning too, because there's a lot of built-in visuals. I'm just going to pause and give you an example of how powerful a whiteboard can be. And I'll tell you again, I observed this after years of studying this, and I, you know, can give you the papers, the science scholarly papers talking about the importance of supporting kids' ability to internalize language or to keep track of the spoken word. But I didn't really understand it till I was sitting in a schoolroom and I watched a kiddo. This was in a specialized school, a self-contained class for kids who are really struggling. This kiddo had autism and a lot of brain-based difficulties that led him to get overloaded and melt down. And so he'd been destructive, and he ended up in this class that had 6 kids in it and a really good teacher. And she gave all kinds of visual supports for a writing task she wanted them to do. They had to write that paragraph, and she described on the board, on the Promethean board, exactly the steps she wanted them to follow. 5 of the kids got started on the task immediately. The 6th, the one I was watching, leaned back and put his across his shoulders, his arms, and he really gave every indication that he wasn't going to do that. And it looked like a real, well, I'm not doing that. She came up to him. She said, I need you to get started. He said, no, not doing it. She said, no, really, we have recess in 15 minutes. You know, I want you to get out there for that. And let's just get this out of the way. Nope, not doing it. At which point she turned away, which was very smart, right? When you start to get into a power struggle with a kid who has executive function challenges, you want to be very aware of that and you want to pull out of it. And often the adult needs that minute, that time out for themselves to kind of think about what they're going to do next. I was right with her at this point, but then she came back with a whiteboard and she wrote down on it exactly what she said to him. I want you to get started. And she handed it to him. At this point, I'm thinking, really? Like, this kid has pretty good language skills. What is she doing? What he wrote when she handed him the whiteboard was, my pencil is broken. And what that told me at that moment is that these problems, holding language in your head and using it to guide your behavior through a plan, they can be really big. And slowing it down and getting the adult's face out of the kid's face, giving them that sort of calm whiteboard to look at and giving them time to respond can be essential for them to move forward. So keep that in mind when you think about incorporating these into your work. Whiteboards can be great ways to both break something down and make it concrete and visual. Here's a little flow chart for helping John, a boy who had an interaction with John, sort out what happened. Because what happened was John had the book the boy wanted. He hit John, took the book, he's missing recess. Now we can lay that out visually, and then we can say, was that what you wanted, right? And the answer is probably no. And then we can say, well, how can we do this differently next time? And then we can do the path that gives him an alternative behavior, all with a visual and at a calm pace that he doesn't have to process in the moment. So that's a quick run through of some of those key executive function supports. And what I want to do now is move forward with how can we teach executive function skills. And the primary thing here, and this is from our, my years of work understanding executive functions, but also building this intervention and trialing it, as I say, in schools and with parents, and seeing the effects, is the primary thing we do is we create a common language of self-regulatory scripts to help children with that cognitive, behavioral, and emotion regulation. So what do I mean? I'll give you a little bit of details about Unstuck and Untarget. It is basically a cognitive behavioral intervention. It's written to be implemented in schools, although it's also used in a lot of clinics. It's a small group intervention. So in schools, it's often considered a tier 2 intervention, but it's been adapted to push some of these activities in Unstuck into tier 1. And also it's used in a lot of self-contained tier 3 settings. It's not something I would recommend parents try to implement at home. You want a small group of kids to engage together. So it's typically in a clinic or school setting, but parents do a ton to reinforce this because there's no common language if it doesn't happen at home. And Unstuck is 21 of these small lessons. They're about 20 to 30 minutes long each. And they go through 3 main topic areas. We start with foundational skills, how to recognize when you're getting upset, and how to cope when you're getting upset. But then we move right into what is flexibility and what does it mean to be flexible? Because when we're talking about elementary school kids, and this edition of Unstuck is designed for elementary school kids. At the end, I'll mention the high school version, which is a little different. But for the elementary school kids, they tend to be pretty concrete. And so we start with physically, what is flexibility? We have them run an obstacle course when they have a rigid body versus a flexible body. We talk to them about the fact that if they're tired, they get to sit down, and that's because their body's flexible. We're trying to give them concrete experience with the value of flexibility. And then we move into, and you can be flexible with your mind, and that can be really helpful too. And that's helpful because there's this kind of awful fact of life that none of the adults in your world can control. And that is that none of us can always get what we want. And when we can't get exactly what we want, flexibility is what helps us get at least part of what we want. We can't get it all, but if we're flexible and we don't get stuck, we can work towards part of what we want. And as we work through those examples, we talk about how to be flexible. And then we move into goals and big picture thinking and how there's something that you want and that's your goal, and your plan is what helps you get there. And so that's a really quick overview of the curriculum. What I will tell you is that we were really excited to see this year that as the Virginia Department of Education works on proposed emotional learning standards, Unstuck lines up almost perfectly with what the Department of Education is looking for in terms of enhancing children's social emotional learning around self-awareness, self-management, decision-making, relationship skills. We really would say that these 21 lessons are kind of a pre-written school lesson plan that we can just hand to the elementary school teacher that she can then take and use effectively to meet her students' social emotional learning needs. And goodness knows, this is the year to think hard about those because we are all so stressed. You know, what kids have had to do in terms of coping with not being in school, and the adults in terms of working, helping our kids get through that process, whether there are teachers or parents. This is the moment to think about this. And we really think that Unstuck offers a great way to address these needs. So what do I mean by common language? It's not very complicated. It's using words like flexible, stuck, unstuck, compromise, plan A, plan B. And it's using them, having all of the adults in the child's life use those words. So when the teacher says, oh my goodness, Promethean board's not working today, I need a plan B, that signals to the child in that class, this is something that helps my teacher regulate her behavior. And when a child sees parents saying to each other, oh, you wanted to go play golf this afternoon, but I really thought we all needed to find, go to the grocery store together to make the plan for the week's meals, then the parents can then say, we need to compromise. We need to do something so that we can both get some of what we want. And that's the key language there. It's hard for adults to remember that compromise works the same with adults as it does with kids. So we also need to compromise with our young people in a way that we both get something of what we want. It's hearing these words that have been practiced and played in games and sort of engaged in fun ways in the intervention. It's hearing them throughout their school day and their home life that really give the power behind this common language that everybody starts to model for a child who's working on improving their regulatory skills. Goal, why, plan, do, check is the universal script for getting things done. And in the Unstuck intervention, it's used in its entirety. Kids work on different goal, why, plan, do checks, and the goals can be anything from I really want to get an A in my math class this year to I really want to make a new friend to I just want to have fun at recess, right? But there's always a why so that children understand why they're doing something. They're much better at it. And then there's plans, and there might be more than one plan, but then we do it and then we check it. Parents and teachers can offhand just use pieces of this. My goal today is that we can all go to the pool. The reason is because we all as a family have so much fun there. The plan is I'm going to get up early and try to get the grocery shopping done. And then I'm hoping the family can all work together to get the laundry in, and then we can go together to the pool. I want to give you just a quick video. This is from the teacher training I'm going to talk about of how teachers can implement this language in just their mainstream classes. So I'm going to play this.
Paper from last week. That was the last one.
Why didn't you just write on the...
My plan A was to use the next sheet, and then it wasn't there. Then I had to change it, and I went to go get...
So sorry, I did that.
Get a pad, and the other pad I had in there that was new, it was upside down, and all the paper was rippled, and the pad was ruined. So then my plan B didn't work. So then I needed a plan C, so I put it back up, and I just taped up the paper. Did it work out okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just a little deal, right? All right.
So what he did there was on the spur of the moment, incorporate that, the materials weren't working the way he wanted. His plan A wasn't working, so he needed a plan B. Because he's used this language a lot with these kiddos, they helped him. He needed a plan B, and then the kids chime in and a plan C, right? He used another Unstuck script or vocabulary, which is big deal, little deal. A lot of helping kids regulate their emotional responses is helping them learn to distinguish between, is this a big deal or a little deal? We never tell kids that their feelings are a little deal, but we can ask them, is this a big deal or a little deal? And if they say it's a big deal, then we can say, how can we turn this into a little deal? In his case, he got to model how he turned something into a little deal. And he said, yeah, this was just a little deal at the end. This intervention works, and it works as I said, in multiple trials. We've found that it improves kids' ability, 3rd to 5th graders. We've studied it in autism and in ADHD for it. So we can't say we have the evidence, but we have a lot of anecdotal information from teachers and therapists that any inflexible child, whether they've had a brain injury or they're anxious or whatever it may be, kids who have flexibility problems and organization and integration and planning problems, they improve after Unstuck in the mainstream classroom when we observe them, and we're blinded. We don't know whether they've gotten our intervention or a matched intervention, same dose, same intensity. And what we can see is that before Unstuck compared to after Unstuck, shows much bigger gains in key behaviors in the classroom than before other interventions, in this case, Jed Baker's social skills intervention. So whether it's following the rules, whether it's making a transition, not getting stuck in class, not getting negative or overwhelmed, participating in class, we see these big levels of improvement across each of these behaviors following Unstuck. We also have really powerful anecdotal examples of this. Parents telling us this was a lifesaver for our child, this teacher talking about a child's meltdowns being dramatically reduced. And so we really feel confident when we argue that this is an evidence-based or research-validated tool. And I want you all to know that there's a unique opportunity this year to access these tools. So because we are funded by the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute, which is a federal institute that's designed to test and evaluate evidence-based treatments, because we've already shown through a previous PCORI grant that Unstuck helped 3rd to 5th graders with autism or ADHD and inflexibility who were in low-income schools. So these were Title I schools throughout Virginia and the district. Because we've already shown that evidence, they now are funding us to try to implement this, to try to basically give it away as best we can. And so we've created interactive training modules, and I'll show you an example of one of those in a minute. These are online asynchronous modules. There's 9 of them. Some of them are as short as 3 minutes long. Some of them are a little longer. They come with CE credits. So a teacher or an educator can get credit for viewing them. And we will give you access to the credits and the online training for free. We'll give you the full Unstuck published manual and kit with all the materials you would need to run these groups in an elementary school. If you want to assess outcomes, we'll give you a toolkit for that. We'll also give you online training and support if you want that. And we have free parent videos. So as a program, as an integrated program, an elementary school can run this program with kind of all the materials sort of at your doorstep and have some tools for engaging parents. Parents can also access these videos for free right now on your own if your school isn't participating. But we're really excited about this opportunity. We're able to offer it to 100 schools throughout the state of Virginia. We still have some space in enrollment. It's only going to be this year. So, we hope that you will get in touch with us, and I'll show you how to do that in a minute. If you want to pursue this, we need to hear from you soon. And I wanted to just show you a sample of one of those modules. So as I said, there's a teacher training that we provide that really can be used for all kinds of people. It's together, all the modules are designed for somebody who wants to implement Unstuck in the classroom, but individual modules could be pulled out to share with a paraeducator, a new classroom teacher, the school counselor, anybody who wants to learn more about these things that I've been sharing with you. What is executive function? How do I tell a can't from a won't? In this case, this module here is going to talk about sort of how do you use this in the real classroom. Now let's make sure, I think I have to stop share, and now I'm going to reshare.
Let's learn how you can help your students learn flexibility.
Wait, I'm sorry. I'm going to stop that one more time. I just want to make sure I did that right. Yes, I did. How about that? Is anybody getting the feeling that technology is not my expertise? Okay, here you go. So here's the entirety of Module 7 of the teacher training.
By explicitly teaching the Unstuck vocabulary in your small groups, you are helping to create common language that helps everyone manage flexibility challenges. Click each box to learn how this common language works.
So this is where the teacher would click.
Carter says, "I'm stuck," and Miss Davis tells him that she can help him get unstuck. She suggests that they make a plan B. And Carter says, "That works." Mr. Holly models how to manage a problem by saying, "This problem feels like a big deal. Can you help me turn it into a little deal?" And Marisa agrees to help him. Mr. Holly suggests that he needs to try a plan B. Marisa then begins to offer suggestions. Let's watch this teacher review how making a plan B helped her when she couldn't get her video to show at the beginning of class.
Okay, so they had to do some what? What's these words on the board? Problem solving. Did we have to do problem solving before we watched the video?
Yeah.
Yeah. What kind of problem solving did we have to do?
We had to come up with the plan A, plan B, plan C, and the plan D. Finally, our plan A worked.
So I'm going to cut that short just because I realize we're getting low on time, but you just get a feel of how we've heard from teachers over and over again that they want to see other teachers putting these tools into action. So we do a lot of sharing teachers in action. Also, the training modules have a lot of teachers just talking about Unstuck and how they use it or don't use it. For the parent videos, did I do a good job of sharing this again? You guys, I think I'm okay here. I'm just going to show you the beginning. This is one of 12 parent videos that tell parents how to kind of recognize executive functions and also support their kids in using those key vocabulary words.
Does a morning like this sound familiar?
Mom, where's my notebook?
I told you to be ready 5 minutes ago.
But I didn't do my homework.
I can't have another morning like this. I'm tired of yelling.
Your shirt is dirty. You have to wear something else.
Fine, then I'm not going.
What you may not realize is that these are signs of executive functioning challenges. Executive functioning, or EF, is a set of skills located in the front part of the brain. This part of the brain helps us get and do what we want and need. This is the last part of the brain to develop, a process that ends when we're about 30 years old. Time is on your side. Time to teach your child how to use their strengths to build skills and use their environment to support their success. Here are some specific examples of how EF plays out in the morning routine. The child who insists on wearing the dirty shirt may struggle with flexibility. The child who lost their notebook might have challenges staying organized. Does a morning like this sound?
So I'm going to stop it there just because I realize we're at time. If you want to learn more about Unstuck, about this implementation project, about accessing any of these resources, or if you just want to get those free parent videos, this QR code will take you to all of that information. So I'll pause here for a minute because if you want, you can hold your camera up to it. I bet you Stacy will have a way too of sharing this slide deck with you as well at a later time. Before I end, I also just want to make sure you're aware that we do think about these skills as spiraling. We don't think you can just learn these once in elementary school and be done. And so we've developed middle and high school versions of Unstuck. And right now, there's also a trial that's available throughout the state of Virginia for high schoolers. So this would be folks who are diploma track, but who have these challenges with executive functioning and really need some of the same kinds of supports, but just as for older kids focused on self-advocacy and other things. You should go to this QR code here and it will help you find out about that trial and how, if you want, your school could engage with it. It also comes with lots of free materials. So I'm going to stop there. Thank you so much for your time. And I'm happy to stay on for a few minutes for questions. I don't know, Stacy, how that works though.
Absolutely. So if you have any questions, thank you, first of all, Lauren, that was wonderful, as always. But if you do have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat box. This presentation, the video and the slide deck will be posted on the VCU Autism Center website. And Katie put the link in the chat box of where to find it. But really, if you could get this in your school, in your classroom, it makes such a world of difference. It really does. And it really aligns nicely with the SEL curricula that we need to be doing in Virginia.
Thanks, Stacy.
We don't have any questions yet in our chat, but if they pop in the next couple minutes, I'd be happy to ask those for anyone. So I know I was taking notes, Dr. Kenworthy, on some things that I hope to implement with my own children. So thank you.
I know the parent video, I'm like, wait a second, were you in my house yesterday?
Yes, that's exactly how I felt about it. Yeah.
Yeah, me too.
It's true. Good practices are good practices, right? So, okay, it looks like we have something coming into the chat here. Some thank you for the presentations. I thought there was research portion of this where we had to get permission to use it with students. Do you know what maybe she's referencing with that?
So, probably I'm guessing this is about the fact that we have run these trials for the elementary school previously in the state of Virginia. But this trial where we are trying to give away these materials, you don't have to get permission from students because they don't have to be part of the process. You can do this as an implementer and we don't engage the students at all. In a subset of schools, we'd like to be able to get a little bit of data from a few students. And so if in that case, you would get permission, but by and large, this is really, we have to get permission from you who are giving the Unstuck thing, because we're going to ask you how the training went. Did you find it useful and that kind of thing.
Okay. Did that answer your question? Oh, she said the research was through William and Mary TTAC, maybe. So maybe that was one of the.
So that's probably a different project.
Okay.
Because we haven't been working through William and Mary on this, although they do great stuff. So they may have something else going on.
Okay.
This project is as I described it.
Okay, got it. And how to get more information on this training program. Lauren shared the QR code that if you did not get that captured on your phone camera to scan it, it'll be available in the slides that we post on the ACE site after today's session. So that would be, yeah. And that was also your question there, Kimberly. So I think
also email me. And I'll put my email in the chat box and I can connect you directly with Dr. Kenworthy.
And I'm happy to share my email too. I really recommend reaching out to Stacy because I think she understands more of she can give you the on the ground view. And so don't bypass her, but I'm also putting mine in because I'm happy to get emails directly if you have any questions. Or if you're like me and you just don't really like QR codes.
Yeah. Right. Well, I know some people mentioned they were joining the meeting from their phone. And so being able to do all of those pieces at the same time, it just doesn't work. So, technology is sometimes wonderful and sometimes it's a challenge. So.
Exactly. And we did that to create a landing page so that people could get everything they would need, but we're happy to provide information. Yeah.
Right.
Information for high school.
Yeah.
Right.
Is that posted? Can they get to that information from the QR code as well?
Yes, there's a separate QR code in the slides that is for the high school.
Got it.
Again, if you reach out to Stacy or me, if you're having any trouble, just tell us what you want and we'll link you to the right person.
Great. Yep, lots of positive affirmations here about how great this information is and the resources, and so really wonderful to have you today.
Well, I just so appreciate the opportunity. I miss that it's not in person. I feel like it's harder to connect, but it was great to have the opportunity to speak. And please follow up in any way. If you have questions or thoughts, or you've used Unstuck and you have suggestions, anything, we'd like to hear it.
Yeah.
Megan, why don't you email Lauren and me, and we can certainly get you that information on how to get it into your school.
Yeah, maybe doing a larger implementation rather than just using the items of the individual student. That's a good question, Megan.
And we're happy to support that.
Yeah, wishing you had this information years ago. I'm sure that is a common sentiment.
Yeah. But you know what? We're just looking forward. It's
never too late, right?
Yeah.
It's never too late.
It's never too late, and we would love to help you go there now.
Good, good, good.
All right.
All right. Well, I guess if there's no other questions.
All right. Well, thank you again.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And everybody just keep an eye open for the archive so you can review it again and have all the notes from her slides. So, yep.
All right. Bye-bye.
All right. Take care, everyone.